This review was filmed during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, the works being covered here wouldn't exist. I fully support both the WGA and SAG-AFTRA in their fight for fair treatment and compensation against a system that continually denies them such. While a full boycott has not been called for, SAG-AFTRA has asked that everyone who does media about film and TV refrain from promoting struck content during this time. From what I can tell based on guidelines released, independent reviews do not constitute promotion of work, but as critical assessment of a work of art. Any praise I give to these works should be seen purely as praise for the artists, writers, and actors who created it. If anything, the praise is emphasizing that the writers, actors, and other artists deserve more compensation because they are who make these works possible. Additionally, this video was not made using any studio-provided screeners or materials. Do not support any studios during the strike. If you want to know more information, there are links down in the description for you to follow. Undead Andorians and alien clouds. Not something I thought I needed in the same episode, but here we are. Hello everyone, welcome back to the latest Minty reviews, and we are here for the next episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, episode 6, titled Lost in Translation. And if you watched my Secret Invasion reviews that I just did, I'm actually doing these post the episodes coming out because of all the strikes going on. There should be a thing at the very beginning of the video explaining all that, but here we are doing those reviews now. So episode 6, Lost in Translation, is a great episode. It was one of the better ones, I think, in the whole season, but this season has been incredibly strong this whole time. As I normally do with these reviews, I'm going to start off with a non-spoiler section first, and then go into spoilers afterwards, just to kind of deeper talk about some things in the episode. But either way, let's start off real quick first off with the non-spoiler section. So, non-spoilers here. This episode was really good and really fun. And I wasn't expecting there to be like a psychological horror episode in this season, but here we are. And also, this was a great, basically solo episode in a way for Uhura. And Celia Rose Gooding did such a great job throughout the entirety of the episode, and we'll get into it further in the spoiler section, but she did a phenomenal job in this whole episode, just kind of being the leading role in it. And I'm glad we got a solo Uhura episode. Beyond all that, there was some great, like, actual scenes involved with, like, some actual, like, horror things going on, especially like psychological horror going on, that were just really, really good to see, that weren't, like, too terrifying, but were just spooky enough, like, oh, that's kind of getting me a little bit, but, like, just enough to add a little attention to it. Beyond all that, there were some great interactions between certain characters that I will get into in spoiler sections, but are too much of a spoiler right now to talk about. But there were some phenomenal interactions between certain characters involved in the whole show that were just pizza chef. Just chef's kiss there. Chef's kiss. And then also just the whole storyline of the episode, really fun. It was a fun in the way of like, oh, this is like great time. The fun as in like, oh, this is really well written, and I'm enjoying the journey through this. But that's basically all I can say for non-spoilers. It was just a good episode, and I'm really glad Uhura got a solo episode to herself, basically. That just was a good time. Really good time. So now on to spoilers. Spoilers section here, everyone, so be prepared. Spoilers here. So in 3, 2, 1, Kirk's back. Yes, so we'll start this off first off with Kirk's back. The Enterprise joins the Ferragut out at this, like, deep space refinery, the best way to put it. Pike jokes is like a gas station, but they find they have a refinery for deuterium, this like space particle chemical thing that can fuel the ships, and they're there protecting it, trying to get it back up and running because this thing is so far out. This is like the edge of Federation space, so then they can like explore more. So cool, we got a whole thing there. However, when they get there and they start like doing stuff with the deuterium, Uhura starts hearing this weird transmission that no one else can hear. And it starts making her hallucinate after a while, and she starts seeing a lot of very bad things. She sees a zombie version of Hemmer, which is honestly quite terrifying, but a great thing we saw. She starts seeing like visions of her family that died in the shuttle crash. She starts fighting herself at one point and seeing a bunch of dead crew. She sees the entire bridge crew of the Enterprise get blown out of the front of the Enterprise. It's wild. She starts seeing a lot of things. At the same time, Kirk is there as well, because he's on the Ferragut. He's going over to the Enterprise, help him out and everything. And he's like, yep, I'm here. We're all here. So we get Kirk on the actual Enterprise, And it's really cool because this is, I believe, the first actual canon appearance of Kirk on the Enterprise. And we have some great back and forth between him and Sam, where there is clearly like a sibling rivalry there, where Sam feels like that Kirk is overcompensating for trying to like appease their dad, and Kirk is thinking that Sam isn't doing enough to appease their dad. There's a lot of like sibling rivalry there, and it's really cool to see the dynamic between them and to actually get some backstory between them as well. But on to the more important stuff of the episode of Uhura. So as we go through the episode, we basically find out that that Uhura is not the only one being affected by this. There's another person on the Ferragut as well, named Ramon, who was also hearing things, seeing these visions, and we find out that the deuterium cloud that they're using to refine and make fuel out of basically has like interdimensional aliens attached to the particles. Just go with me here. It's some Star Trek sci-fi stuff. Just go with me here. But there are aliens attached to the particles in the deuterium. So when they're using the deuterium as fuel, it's actually torturing and killing these aliens. And the only way they can actually communicate is by basically having certain criminals hallucinate what's going on and have them feel internally what they're feeling. Just by happen, Uhura was the one that they chose. Probably because of her like language center and her brain being overdeveloped because of the fact she's like the communication specialist and she knows so many languages. That's probably why they were doing that. They like half mention it in the episode that that's probably what was going on there. But it gets Uhura to do the episode basically solo, which is good, which is really cool. And they do solve it. They do solve what was going on and they do help the aliens. But it's just so cool having that whole concept there of these interdimensional aliens that we're basically harming and we didn't even realize we were doing it until we figured it out because of Uhura and it's like, okay, we need to stop this now. However, there's also some other stuff going on too. So on the refinery, we have Pelia and we have Una. And they're having a rough time getting along because they have a quite a rough, contentious relationship. And Una basically covers it by saying like, "Oh, I was in your engineering class and you gave me a C on an exam." And Peli is like, "That there's no way. There is no way that you're still upset about this." Like this many years later, that I gave you a C on an exam. There is no way you're upset. And she's right. And it leads to another part of this episode that is phenomenal that I love. So this episode 1 is an exploration of Uhura, which is great. It is a psychological horror episode, in a way. But it's also a deep exploration of grief and how we deal with grief. Which I as a person, am quite intrigued at stories that deal with grief. It's the reason why Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is my favorite Legend of Zelda game. There's a lot of other series as well that kind of deal with grief in a big way. And I'm a big fan of seeing stories that deal with grief and how they decide to talk about it. And this episode did a really intriguing way by having us basically live through our grief and live through our grievances and then eventually just try to communicate them and get them out. We see that through Una and we see that through Uhura because Uhura, the whole episode, is still grieving over the loss of Hemmer from season 1. And as a fan base, we're also kind of all grieving over the loss of Hemmer because he was such a great character and we loved Hemmer. And still one of those things was like, should they have killed him off this early? Should they have not? Personal opinion. Is all personal opinion there. But it was really cool to see how they dealt with that through Uhura to show that her and Hemmer had just started getting this like really good relationship together. This like, this like student-teacher kind of a thing where he was teaching her how to do engineering things so she could like, solve some things herself. And then he sacrificed himself in season 1. And then now we have Una as well, and her contentious relationship with Pelia is not because of the grade of C on that exam, but because every time she sees Pelia, she's reminded of the fact that Hemmer is dead, and Hemmer sacrificed himself. And Pelia understands that. Pelia is like, I've lived for thousands of years. I understand grief better than anyone else, because I've had to live through it so many times, like lifetimes over. I've had to deal with grief, and it's really intriguing how she's the central point of all this without being like a main crux of this episode. And it's really cool. And eventually Una and Pelia kind of are on a bit more of an agreement. There's still like a bit of like a rough relationship between them by the end of the episode, but there is enough of like no, you're just grieving and it's okay that you're grieving. And I understand it. I understand, but you have to try and work through this yourself. And it's just cool. It's really cool how they wrapped it up in this episode as well. And then we also have Kirk. And Kirk's a very important part of this episode as well, dealing with this theme of grief and dealing with Uhura as well. Because there's this one scene where they're sitting in Uhura's, I believe it's Uhura's cabin, and Uhura's basically saying to herself, like, am I going crazy? Am I going to end up like Ramon and try to, like, murder everyone on the ship and try to, like, you know, blow up the ship? Am I going to do that? And Kirk's like, you need to just calm down. Like, calm down. You have been through way too much. You have been through so much at your young age. And that's what Starfleet does. Starfleet confronts you so much with death, and you need to figure out a way to deal with it. And right now, death is winning, because death is making you feel so bad. But you need to not, like, hold it back. You need to not, like, push it down as you've been doing. And you need to just accept it and start figuring out how to grieve, because she hasn't been sleeping, she hasn't really been working as properly, and she hasn't actually processed the loss of her family yet. And that's basically what Kirk's saying. Kirk's saying, like, hey, just take a moment, breathe, and you just need to live with your grief for a bit and just work through it in your own way, beyond overworking yourself and just ignoring it. You need to actually work through it, which is the whole point of the episode. It's great to see that with the deuterium aliens as well, as basically a actual, like, physical and visual representation of the metaphor of, yeah, Uhura, deal with your grief. Like, deal with your grief, or you're going to kill everyone on the ship, please. And she does. Like, they do. They end with, like, a big thing where they can't shut down the refinery because it's too sabotaged by Ramon. So they have to blow it up. So they just blow up the refinery. So Pike's going to have to get some flack for that, because they blew up a refinery that was going to be a very crucial part of further exploration into the system. But they just kind of hand-wave that, and Pike's like, yeah, I'll just take the blame for that. It's okay. Don't worry. I'll take the blame for that. Or I'll just blame Kirk, and that's fine. And Kirk's like, I'm here to help. I'm here to help. But, so that was, like, all that stuff. But it ends with a great interaction where Kirk and Uhura have had, like, the whole episode where they've been, like, getting along and becoming, like, friends in a way. And there's some funny parts about Uhura being like, stop hitting on me. And Kirk's like, I'm not hitting on you. I'm actually just being generally kind of nice here. But I understand. I get it. I understand. But at the end, we get a really lovely scene of Kirk and Uhura talking. There's also a scene with, like, Kirk and Sam and them still having the sibling relationship thing that they're doing. Then Spock comes over. So we have the first meeting of Spock, Kirk together. And they're just bonding over how much they just kind of don't like Sam, which is just really funny. It's like, yeah, no, that kind of feels like what you kind of would expect the first meeting of Kirk and Spock to be. Not this, like, grand, like, big thing of, like, oh, it's great to meet you, Spock. It's like, yeah, no, Sam's kind of a dick as well. Yeah, and it's just kind of share a drink at a bar. It's like, that's funny. And the scene, the whole episode ends with just, like, this, like, looming shot of just, like, a zoom out of just Kirk, Uhura, and Spock together. And it's like, wow, that's 3 of the original series crew just meeting for the first time. And that's really cool. That's really, really cool. So, overall, this episode was really great. And I love the theming of this episode, and I love how they did the theming in this episode so much. And the visuals were really good too. Like, the makeup on zombie undead Hammer was great. And just all of the emotions dealt with this episode were so good. Now, was it one of the best episodes in this season, in this series? Comparatively, no. No. Like, Charades is phenomenal. Ad Astra per Aspera, phenomenal. But I really love, personally, what it was doing. And this is ultimately, like, in my top of the episodes this season. It's definitely not in the bottom so far. It's in the top to mid. But this season has had so many great episodes, it's kind of hard to rank them, but I will by the end of the season. But I just love this episode. This episode is really great, and I'm glad that Uhura got a great showing. And all the acting from everyone involved was just so good. But either way, let me know down in the comments as well what do you think about this episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and what do you think about the first meeting of Kirk, Uhura, and Spock together? Like, what do you think about the whole scene, and also all the explorations they did of various emotions, mainly grief in this episode? If you like this review as well, leave a like. It definitely helps out in the algorithm and everything. If you want to see more reviews and more positive things and more reactions that I do, leave a subscription. It definitely helps out in the long run. I truly do appreciate it, and you get notified of everything that I post. And I do try to post pretty regularly and pretty frequently of things that I like to do. But either way, beyond all that, right over here is going to be another playlist for something else you can watch from the channel. Go ahead and watch that as well. Over here is going to be a video that YouTube recommends for you as well. Until next time, just stay enterprising, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, peace, everyone. Peace.